Hey everyone, thanks for tuning into our ongoing Reformation series where we're talking to thought leaders across the election reform and innovation landscape to hear about best practices and new ideas and new ways of thinking about our often antiquated and highly partisan election systems that lack access and lack options and lack competition. And so, one of the thought leaders that I'm excited to connect with today is a friend, someone who I admire for her work in election reform, administration, and access. Jocelyn Bucaro, who's with Tusk Philanthropies. And Jocelyn, thanks for spending a little time with the VPI audience here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Hello, everybody. It's great to be with you.
Yeah. So, Jocelyn, tell everyone just your background, because I think it's really interesting what you have done in a prior life, and then what led you to Tusk Philanthropies and what your focus is now.
Sure. Well, I started my career in working on the political side of elections. I worked in just about every level of political campaign and also worked in Washington at the highest levels of government in the White House and on Capitol Hill. And so I spent the first part of my career really working in that field and gained a lot of, obviously, expertise on the difficulties voters face when actually trying to exercise their right to vote. And then I turned that actually into a second part of my career when I started working on the administrative side of elections and actually was an election director for about a decade, running elections in a suburban Cincinnati County in Ohio, and then moved to Denver, Colorado, where I ran elections in the city and county of Denver for several years. And it was during that time that I got introduced to the work of Tusk Philanthropies and its mission to expand access to digital voting options, including mobile voting. We actually ran a pilot with grant funding and grant support from Tusk Philanthropies to offer our military and overseas voters the option to vote using a mobile app in the 2019 Denver municipal election cycle. And it went so well. In fact, it's one of the few times when you actually conduct a survey with users where 100% of the survey responses of the folks who use the voting app said they wanted to use it in all elections in the future. So clearly it was well received by those eligible voters. And I stayed connected with the work of Tusk Philanthropies after that. And once 2020 was over and we all survived that fun year, I was excited to have the opportunity to join the mobile voting work that Tusk Philanthropy is doing as director of mobile voting. So I've been here for just about 2.5 years.
So, what is the current state of mobile voting? So, I think mobile voting is something like, we bank on our phones, we do a lot of things on our phones. Most people don't think about voting as being something that can be done electronically. But what is the current state before I make assumptions about that?
Yeah, so right now in 33 states, plus the District of Columbia, a certain set of voters are eligible to both receive a ballot electronically over the internet and then return it electronically over the internet. In most cases, that only includes military voters and voters who are outside of the country. And then in a handful of states, I think we're up to 14 states have enacted legislation to expand access to include people with disabilities or people with print disabilities, like voters who are blind or have a physical impairment that prevents them from hand marking a paper ballot. And in a couple of examples, including Colorado, which is one of those states, voters in emergency situations are also able to vote that way. And so that's sort of where the landscape sits right now. And in those jurisdictions, there have been mobile voting pilots. In fact, mobile voting has been piloted in over 330 jurisdictions across 10 states since 2018, with a mixture of blue and red states, both county level implementations and statewide implementations. And we've really used those pilots to demonstrate not only that the technology exists and works and improves the experience for people who need access to those options, but that it can actually make the process more secure than available options that they're using today, more convenient for the voter, less burdensome for the voter, and even increase participation among those eligible voters.
So where is the opposition to this? I mean, so everything you're saying sort of sounds like, making it more, easier to access and increasing participation, maybe even increasing security. And you said that there's kind of data behind that, but obviously this is sort of not happening everywhere. So what's the opposition to this kind of an innovation?
Well, this is casting ballots over the internet. So the number one reason why people are hesitant to embrace this or adopt it or expand it is security, and it's that's the right reason. Anytime you're transacting over the internet, you're introducing new risks. No voting method right now is risk-free. And in our opinion, mobile voting helps address some of the risks of other voting options, particularly by mail options, such as postal delivery delays or errors that voters make when marking a ballot by hand that they may not realize they've made when they're casting a ballot by mail. But adding the internet means you're introducing new risks and allowing voters to use their own personal devices to mark their ballots and return their ballots. We all love our mobile phones. I think our smartphones and our tablets and laptops, but we also know that in using them, we may be using devices that are not completely secure. And so the resistance is, if voters are using an unsecure device to mark their ballot and return it, how will we know if the ballot that is received on the other side by the election official reflects the same choices the voter made when marking their ballot? So that's the real that's the real challenge, and that's the real reason for opposition to mobile voting is security. And I'm really excited about some of the work that we have underway right now in Tusk Philanthropies. We're supporting research and development into new technology that we hope will help mitigate some of those risks and give voters the evidence that they would need to independently verify that the ballot received by the election official is correct, and that there was nothing tampering with their ballot without their knowledge, and giving them the clear evidence that they would receive, for example, when casting a ballot in person, that their ballot is correct. And we're excited. This technology is under development right now. It's in beta testing, and we think that it has the potential to transform the landscape for this and address many of the risks that are keeping the expansion of mobile voting to more people today.
And why does this matter for military and overseas voters? You mentioned that in many instances, 33 jurisdictions, as well as I think federally through the National Defense Authorization Act, military overseas are allowed to vote electronically. Why does it matter to them? And also, what are they doing now if it's not using this new technology?
Yeah, so it's critical that these are voters who, because of their deployment, because of their where they are physically located in the world, whether they're serving in an active fire zone or if they're serving in a remote location in the world with limited access to regular mail service, have tremendous difficulty getting information about an election, getting a ballot delivered to them by mail, and then getting a ballot returned in time by mail. I know, speaking, to this audience and to military veterans, you all know much better than I do, having served, what the experience is like. And if you were able to vote successfully, the number of hurdles you most likely had to jump through in order to exercise that right. The other problem with the available options today, especially if you don't have access to those electronic return options, because under federal law, military and overseas voters are automatically qualified to receive a ballot electronically, but it's only in those 33 states where they can return it the same way. Without that option, you're often forced to vote your ballot weeks before the election, in which case you may not have access to the same information that voters who are not overseas or not deployed might have up to and including election day to make your decision about who you want to vote for or how you want to vote on specific issues. So that's another benefit to having access to those options for those voters. Today, in those 33 states, most of the time, those voters are returning a ballot as a PDF attachment to an email, which means they're forced to give up their right to a secret ballot because the election official will obviously be able to see their marked ballot alongside their identity. So there's no secret ballot in that case. And then there's actually no security involved either. So these are ballots being cast in federal, state, and local elections today that are being transmitted over the internet as PDF attachments, with no ability for the voter to verify that at the end of the process, nothing is tampered with that PDF or that email.
Interesting. And so technology solutions that work for the military community, I mean, that sort of inherently becomes a beta for what could be expanded for U.S. populations more broadly. Is that part of the thinking?
Yeah, I think so. I think at a minimum, there are certain voters for whom available options simply don't work well, and I just outlined some of the reasons why by mail voting doesn't work well for military and overseas voters. But same can be said for people with disabilities, who cannot physically mark a ballot by hand without assistance, and having access to digital technology tools and assistive technology in their home that they use every day would enhance the voting process for them as well. I also mentioned voters in emergency situations. There are other voting groups that would stand to benefit from having access to these kinds of options, because existing options, whether by mail or in person, create barriers that prevent them from being able to successfully vote. Young people, college students, their lives are not set up for voting by traditional methods today. And we see pretty significant turnout gaps among those voters as a result, even in presidential election years. Similarly, voters in tribal communities face probably more obstacles than even military voters casting a ballot, and as a result have at least a 10% turnout gap from all other voting groups, except maybe overseas citizens. And so we think, this, while it may not be the perfect and best and only solution, has the potential to solve a lot of those access issues that are keeping certain voters from being able to successfully vote.
You spent years as an election administrator, and elections and election security and ballot access, and these kind of became flashpoints in the national political discourse. Give us a little sense as to what is the state of locally administered elections? What are the myths? What's true? What's not? What's your assessment, having actually run elections, and what do we as Americans need to be thinking about in terms of elections and election security?
I think the number one most important thing is that elections today, first off, are conducted by your neighbors, whether it's poll workers who are recruited as volunteers. Maybe there's small stipend paid volunteers who are serving in polling places or helping process mail ballots or verifying signatures on mail ballots. But elections right now are conducted and administered by the people who live next door to you or down the street from you. So if you have, any suspicion as to whether an election outcome is correct, just remember that the ballots are created, proofed, tested, processed, and ultimately counted by individuals who live and work in your community, and who are only interested in seeing the process work the way it's supposed to. So that's number one. I would say number two, they have some of the most difficult jobs, I think, in local government. They have to be IT professionals. They have to be communication specialists. They have to understand social media, and they have to be fiscal stewards, managing taxpayer funding, supported elections, and maximizing efficiencies while minimizing cost. They are human resources experts. They are volunteer managers, and they are data experts. So they wear a lot of hats, and they have very complicated jobs that grow more complicated every year. But I think if it bears remembering that ultimately every local election official in this country is really only interested in one thing: seeing voters be able to vote, seeing election results tabulated and reported as quickly as possible and as accurately as possible, and often have little to no interest in the outcome. So they just want to see an election get run well, and really don't ultimately care about the outcome. In fact, most election officials have a joke that they want to see high turnout because it's quite time consuming and costly to put on an election. And when voters don't show up, it can be frustrating and discouraging. So they want to see high turnout and they want to see wide margins. They don't like close elections.
Yeah. And I want to give a shout out to our partners at Vet the Vote, which is an organization that recruits veterans to serve as poll workers. And, if you haven't worked as a poll worker, you should. It's a great experience. I've done it I started doing it in high school and continue to do it. And actually in the Navy was, I forgot what the name of it was, but it was sort of a secondary duty, which someone on the ship had to be the voting officer, which was, your job was basically make sure that and encourage people to actually be voting. And so I was deep in that work and helping people, fill out the necessary paperwork to request vote by mail back to the ship, which was forward deployed in 2002. So yeah, tons of logistics with that and the challenges of that I became keenly aware of. And also just like the honesty of the process and that it is a hyper local exercise. And so I think if folks have time and capacity, you should absolutely consider being a poll worker and seeing what goes into actually administering our elections, because it is different by state and it's different by municipality. I want to ask we tend to be so kind of like mired in the U.S. construct around these issues. What do other countries do? I mean, who's doing what? Like, what do you think is best practice, and where are you seeing that done, either here or abroad?
I think it's difficult to compare U.S. elections and U.S. democracy with democracy in other countries because most countries outside of the United States have a number of political parties. Do not have just two political parties, and those that do have, for example, the UK system, they're parliamentary systems, so they don't have presidential elections with the level of interest and focus that we receive here. So I think from that standpoint, most other Western style democracies around the world are doing a better job than we are in terms of both the election sort of trust and constructive sort of government that is incentivized to work for voters and for the electorate and for people, the way you'd expect in a democracy. They have the right incentive structure in place because they have multiple parties that are forced to work together and form coalitions in order to actually have an effective government. Here, we obviously have a different incentive structure. Here, the incentives are all designed to break down the system, prevent progress, prevent functioning. In fact, politicians, unfortunately, in this country are rewarded for being disruptors, for we've seen it in just the last couple of weeks. We're recording this on June 27th. In the last 2 weeks in the House of Representatives, we've seen all work basically come to a screeching halt because of the way the incentive structure in our democracy works right now. And I know, the work you all are doing with Veterans for Political Innovation is helping to solve some of the issues in our existing democracy to change that incentive structure and hopefully lead to elected officials who serve the broader interests instead of just the hyper partisan interests that exist today. We think mobile voting is another tool to help with that by expanding access, reducing barriers to voting, and increasing participation in every election, including and especially primary elections when current turnout is, below 15% in many cases. That can also help change the incentive structure and change the way politicians respond to the electorate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that definitely we are absolutely committed to efforts like Final Five voting that we think change the incentive structure for people to have to govern as opposed to grandstand. And just the idea that kind of our government can be held hostage by ideologues on either side just feels like a very dangerous precedent. My last question is, let's sort of take this to the optimistic frame. Actually, I have two questions. One is, I always want to pressure test this. Like, does implementation of mobile voting benefit an ideology, a party, a geography? Like, are there kind of puts and takes on what that means for political outcomes is one question. And then the second is just like, I'd love for you to offer a vision like 25 years from now, 50 years from now. What's like maybe an aspirational vision that you hold for how elections and or more broadly our politics get done in this country?
So I'll take the first one first. The political outcomes really should not be impacted by mobile voting. The goal of our democracy, and you hear this from secretaries of state, from Republican and Democratic politicians. The goal in democracy or in election administration is to make it easy to vote and hard to cheat. Well, mobile voting actually accomplishes both. And so, if we can make it easier for people to vote, more people will be able to exercise their right to vote. And the result should be competitive elections in which politicians are forced to respond to the broader electorate instead of just hyper-partisans in either party. There's no reason to think, especially given the evidence of the last 6 years, that higher turnout benefits either party. And I think we've seen that in election after election with expanded access to vote by mail, with other election reforms like vote centers and same-day voter registration, that they really do not impact in one way or another the outcome of the election and which party benefits. But it really helps benefit democracy by ensuring that more people are able to vote. Broader vision, long term, this is going to take a lot of time and effort and energy. So if anyone's interested in getting involved and helping support our work, they can go to mobilevoting.org/action to sign up as a volunteer. We would love to have you. Broadly speaking, we have to pass election reform in all 50 states in order to make this possible. The same way we have to do with ranked choice voting and open primaries and Final Five voting. It's going to take legislative change, which is going to take time, and it's going to take a lot of energy, and it's going to take a groundswell of support at the grassroots level to accomplish. But I think everyone agrees that this is the way elections are headed in the future. This is the future of voting. We're just trying to make it possible today. As the internet transforms, as technology transforms, it's hard to predict where technology is going to be. But I would say with reasonable confidence that it is highly unlikely that in 25 years from now, most voters will be going to an assigned location on a Tuesday in November and have to sign in on any kind of a book, whether it's an electronic poll book or a physical poll book, in order to cast and receive a ballot. And I also think it's highly unlikely that we'll still be using paper ballots to vote. I think we will have more tools, digital tools with improved and more secure internet services to be able to cast ballots online, whether it's through a mobile device or whatever those things look like in the future. Maybe it's on your watch, maybe it's through your eyeglasses, maybe it's in the metaverse in the future. But most likely it will be in a digital environment. And you will feel more assured that only eligible voters are voting, because we'll be able to take advantage of a host of digital verification tools to protect the integrity of the election. And then we'll have super lightning fast election results that are tabulated in seconds instead of days and weeks. So I think that's one way how this can help transform democracy.
That's great. Well, certainly elections that have more access, more competition, more security is, I think, something that ought to be shared goals of everyone's in this country. So, Jocelyn, thank you so much for the time. Mobilevoting.org is the website to learn more or to follow up with Jocelyn and ask questions. And we really appreciate your work and your partnership.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
How long do I sit here?
Ending the recording. We'll definitely trim this less. It's still clicking. This will get edited.
I figured.
Man.
I figured a few seconds for outro is probably helpful.
Yeah, it says it's having trouble connecting. Please check your internet connection.
Watch, the whole thing didn't get recorded.
I know. That would be my luck. We wouldn't even redo it. I would be like, let's just talk about this in 2 weeks. It's still not doing it.
I'm getting live still.
Yeah. In the recording. Well, you can sign off. I can take it from here. It's all on my side.
Okay.
That was great.
Thanks again for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. This will probably go out. We're gonna do a fundraising solicitation email this week, so this will probably go out in 2 weeks.
Okay.
But you'll see it in the newsletter, and I'll bump it to you as well.
Sounds good. Yeah, I think we talk again next week.
Yes, right.
I've seen it sometime soon.
Are you? Let me look. On the what day is it? On the 5th.
Yeah.
Does that still work for you, or do you want to push?
I think I need to move that because I do have a conflict. I can move my conflict though. Either way, what works for you?
I think given it's the week of the 4th.
Yeah.
Push
it to the 12th.
Yeah.
Okay.
Does that work?
Time? Yeah, that works for me.
Okay. I think Noma owns the invite, but let's do that.
Yeah, I'll let her know. I'll just do a proposed new time with her. I'm going to be traveling back from Houston on the 5th anyway. I have to go to Houston on the 4th, which kind of stinks. But
Ooh, for work?
For National Federation of the Blind conference, yeah.
Got it. The week of the 4th.
Yeah. And then I assume I'm going to see you are you going to be I think we talked about this. You'll be at NCSL in August, right? Did you freeze? I think you froze. I'm going to hang up.